Thanks for joining us today. I'm Pete, and this is going to be the peach bum. We're going to tie this up with some Spawn materials here at Spawn Fly Fish. Hope you're ready to have some fun and tie a killer bug. Alright, so what we've got here is the SA280 from Ahrex, size 8. And what we're going for here is just something snack size, if you will. Sea run cutthroat know this color because they've been eating shrimp for as long as they've been alive, just like anything else in the saltwater. So between movement of rabbit, the UV effect from the Simi seal dub, and then of course the recognition of the peach color of a shrimp, and you have a fly that's just going to get eaten. So we're going to use some 6/0 white uni. Let's just get that started. And we're going to just use the flat portion of the shank. We're not going to go down the curve or anything like that. But we are going to be using a micro shank in the front for a jig style movement on this. So we're going to end up tying this upside down, if you will. So for now, we're just going to add on a little tail. And for the tail, I've got a piece of micro cut peach colored rabbit strip. And you can see I've already cleaned just a little portion of that. That's what we're going to use for our tie on. So since this is going to be inverted, we're going to flip this over and tie that onto the top. And some angled 45-degree angled wraps to start and get it on, so make sure that your rabbit's always sitting flush, and then go ahead and cinch it down the rest of the way. About 3 passes, and that's not going to move anywhere. And now we're going to make a loop for our first section of this body with some Simi seal. So go ahead and come back. Let's go around it once, twice, 3 times. Snugged up to the shank again. Tie it back down so it can't go anywhere. And we're ready. Undo those little twists we just made. And just like we're in a cooking show here, I've got some Simi seal in a little stack ready to go. So I'm going to toss that into our loop. Hopefully you can see that just a little bit. I'm going to bring this up to the shank. And again, when you're tying a loop, it's thin to win. The only problem you can run into is having too much material. So go sparse. I'm going to spin until we get it happy from the bottom all the way to the shank. And once you can see that material twisting inside your thread at the shank, go ahead and brush out real quick. Get rid of any of those loose Simi seal fibers you've got trapped in there. And a couple more twists, and we're ready to start wrapping our body. So before I wrap, I like to coax these fibers back so everything's pointing in the direction of the tail. And keep that in mind. We're going to touch every time we come up to the shank, and then relax underneath. Come up to the top, touch, make sure it's trained back, and release. If you're scared of doing any kind of loop materials or techniques, the surest way to get over that fear is just to do it 100 times, and it'll be no big deal. All right, so here we are at the end. I'm gonna tie this loop off once, get rid of the tool. I'm gonna use 3 wraps. And now I'm going to bring this tag end back over itself and give 3 or 4 more wraps down. Cut that, and we're ready for a whip finish. We're going to do 2 whip finishes, 4 wraps per whip finish. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 for our second. And when you're doing your whip finish, remember that thread has to travel forward on each wrap in order to trap that thread underneath. And if you're really worried about it, you can throw a little mellow peach marker on there just to make it match up. And just a touch of loon hardhead. And we're gonna be sealed and ready to go onto our shank. Voila. So Now for the shank, we're using maybe a Spawn 90-degree micro jig shank. And when we get ready to put this bead on, just go ahead and get in there, pry open that arm. And now we're looking for that small hole on the top of the bead. That's gonna get the shank put in there first. And then as you see, that little divot underneath will wanna slide up the shank. And that's, go ahead and crimp back down that arm. And we're ready to slip that onto our hook. Now we'll just replace that in the vise. Now, you can go ahead and tie your thread and cinch down this arm, but I do like to secure the bead with just a little bit of weighted wire. So we're using some non-lead 0.020. And it's gonna take about 7 or 8 wraps. Only because once we push that forward, it will seat inside of the cavity of the bead. And so you're not gonna have as much movement from your bead. Carefully cut underneath, not using your good scissors. Hopefully you have a dedicated wire scissor. Once you got that edge where you want it, we're keeping the bulk of the meat of this bead on the bottom outside, so that as this is in the water, the tendency is going to be to drop quicker. So push that arm down, and you can see I've got room for another wrap, and that's probably about it. So I'll trim that back side now of our weighted wire. I'm just going to roll this edge over and crimp it down with my scissor. Good. All right. So let's start with, reposition this just a touch. There we go. The way I like to do this is get that thread started behind these wire wraps. And now that I'm underneath the arm, I'm just going to come up, push down on the wire with my thumbnail, and then catch it with the thread. And after you have 20-25 wraps on there, it's not going anywhere. Trim out your tag end of that thread. And at this point, just a little touch of loon hard head. And I'm going to put some that's on the thread and some onto the wire wraps. And loon hardhead will stay viscous a little bit longer than normal head cement, so it's going to give you time to get some thread wraps over those weighted wire wraps as well, and really get that glue all the way to the shank. Okay, and now we're just going to use one loop from here to finish the rest of this fly. And in essence, we're just going to reverse what we've done for the tail section. So we're going to have a little bit of Simi seal in our loop, followed by some crosscut rabbit that's already cut. It's still on the hide, but we're just going to slip that strip right into the loop itself and then trim it out. So again, 1, 2, 3 passes around your thread, and that will cinch up to the shank. And now we've made a knot essentially where our loop begins. Keep your tail out of there. Undo those, and of course we've got our little bit of Simi already picked out, so we'll slick that in there, and that's going to take up, let's say, 1.5 inches worth of loop space from top to bottom. And we're going to use another 1 to 1.25 inches of rabbit that's from a crosscut strip, and that's going to go right on the bottom side of our Simi seal. And I'm not going to utilize the full length of these fibers on the rabbit because it would be just a little too long for this fly. So I'm going to use maybe half of it, just a little bit more than half. I do like to get a few twists in here of my dubbing twister, and then it gives you tension on this rabbit so that as you come in here with your scissors and just remove that hide strip, it's not going to pull up a bunch of fibers on you. There we go. So go ahead and continue twisting up your loop. We're making our fake little brush here. And of course the handy dandy brush. Get some of those fibers loosened and anything that's not in the loop will come out.
I stopped by and didn't see your truck earlier.
Yeah, no worries.
I got a meeting at 9 o'clock tomorrow at the moment.
Okay, from here we're just going to again coax those fibers back as we wrap.
See what the city can do.
Yeah.
And so you'll see that we're going to roughly cover half of this shank with Simi seal and then the forward half with the rabbit.
Yeah. I'm happy to hear it.
Well, I know your dad wanted to move in Yellow Apple. I know that.
He's got the little step outside because he's filming right now.
We're almost there.
He's filming.
And that looks pretty good. Now just make sure all these fibers stay back as you're getting these last couple wraps in. And there we go. I'm going to tie that loop off. There's one, get that out of there. Make sure you get a couple good wraps in between where that thread was. Now this thread wrap or the thread tail can come back. Tied off. There's your tag end. Go ahead and trim that out. And some little neat thread head there behind the bead, and we're ready for a whip finish. Another way you can color your thread before the whip finish, up and down a couple times on both sides of the thread there. And 2 whip finishes again, 4 to 5 wraps per whip finish. And there we go. Before we do our final application of our head cement, we're going to go ahead and get in here with our brush and just comb out all these Simi seal fibers, brush back the rabbit a little bit, just in case there are any loose fibers that don't need to be there. They'll come out in the water, but better to just have it out of there now. All right, and we are ready for some head cement. There we go. Nothing crazy. Simple, but very, very effective fly. I hope you guys learned something and hope you tie these up and go out and catch a ton of fish. Thanks so much for joining us here at Spawn. Again, this is Pete, and we'll talk to you guys soon.